Well, you hopped in the rig, so let's go on down the road together. Let's have a good trip. Lots to talk about today. We're going to get a chance to talk about gunfights. That's right, on movies, on sets. Chris Watley's going to join us a little bit later. Get a chance to visit with him about, well, he produces Wild West gunfight shows. And so what happened with Alec Baldwin and what happened with that shooting, what could have happened. I think a lot of you here on the network of Down the Road are familiar with it. You have guns. You understand guns and you understand the safety of guns. And so it's going to be really interesting to see, how that all shakes out as more information comes out. My old man told me years ago, there's nothing more dangerous than a blank cartridge in a gun. So you don't point, you don't aim, you don't do any of those things, but we'll visit at Chris about what could have happened and how all that shook out. Also today, we're going to get an opportunity to talk about America's place in the good old world, I should say. The good old USA's position in the world. How is it going? What are we seeing? All of those things are going to be part of our conversation as well. But let me give you an example of somebody who didn't give up, who fought, and in the end got the ultimate prize for the ultimate sacrifice. A man that I just have a tremendous amount of respect for. Chris Coste is a World Series champion. In 2008, the Philadelphia Phillies won, and I watched Chris Coste be part of that big old huddle as I was cheering for the Phillies like I've never cheered before because of Chris Coste. Right now he's coach of the Concordia Cobbers. He also is the manager when it comes to the FM Redhawks. And so he manages those two teams, so baseball's in his blood. Let's bring him in, have a conversation. Chris, good to have you coming down the road with us.
Yeah, great to be here. World Series starts here shortly, so, usually on October 25th, not everyone's talking baseball, so thanks for having me to be able to talk baseball. Even though the Yankees aren't in it, it's still a pretty good time to watch the World Series.
You had to get that shot in, didn't you? You just had to. I can take the Yankees not being in the World Series, but losing to the Red Sox and getting knocked out that way, that just hurt. That just hurt, Chris.
That's a tough one, but I'm not a Yankees fan necessarily, but baseball's better when at least one of the big market teams, whether it be Red Sox, Yankees, Dodgers, but I'm actually pulling for Houston in this one. I think it'd be good for baseball for the Astros to maybe win and get past the cheating scandal, things like that. I know a lot of people will disagree with that, but I just, for whatever reason, my heart right now leans towards the Astros.
I've wanted to get a chance to ask you that because, of course, the World Series does start tomorrow. But, to me, the Red Sox are a team that I don't cheer for because I'm a Yankee fan. But they end up playing Houston, which many people out there don't cheer for Houston because of that scandal. Here's the thing. When you were a catcher at the major league level, did you do everything that you could to make sure they didn't steal your signs? And here's why that question is so important. The whole premise of what happened with the Astros was based on stealing signs. And so I just have to ask you, isn't that the norm? I mean, why were the Astros singled out as the only team that ever stole signs before?
I think because they used technology and did it in ways that were generally unaccepted, and obviously they got penalized heavily for it, so I think that it made sense. Like, I played with Chase Utley for 4 years, and he was a master at stealing signs, but doing it the right way. Like, if a pitcher tips something, maybe he came set a certain way with flared his glove on a slider or something like that. That's perfectly normal. Or if you're the runner on second base and you pick up a sign sequence and you relay it to the hitter, perfectly acceptable. As a catcher, if our opponent were stealing my signs because of that, that's 100% on me. That's not cheating. It's not going too far. But if you're using technology and cameras, and if you're crazy enough to bang on a trash can of all things, I don't know how they thought they were going to get away with that one. But but like I said, they paid a pretty good price. You could argue whether you take their World Series ring away or not. That's not for me to debate. But these guys through image that will probably never go away. But I think they've proven, the two of the main guys or three of the main guys who are still there, and Altuve, Correa, and Alex Bregman. I think it's proven that they're pretty good players, whether or not they're cheating.
You told me a long time ago that when it gets to playoff baseball, key hits, all of that's fine. Obviously, you need to do that to win games. But you told me it's all about pitching. It's all about pitching and making sure that you've got the right people in the right place to pitch at the right time. When you look at these two teams, which one of them have the right people in the right place to pitch at the right time?
Well, it's a roller coaster ride. I think the Braves have done it in more a conventional way, sometimes letting their starters go longer, using their bullpen a certain way, where the Astros, it's like next best pitcher up in a short-term scenario. Baseball playoffs and the way the pitching has changed so dramatically. When's the last time we've seen a starter go 8 innings? It just doesn't happen very often. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. Some of it is, conservative with the arms or worried about the third time through the order. I'm a big believer in there's so much better pitching options nowadays than there were even 10, 20, 30 years ago. Like John Smoltz in 1991 and Jack Morris, they each went like 9 and 10 innings. You'd never see that nowadays. But at the same time, you have so many more options. A manager has so many more options to put in another guy throwing 98, and then the next guy is throwing 98 with a slider and a changeup. And then the guy after that is throwing 102 miles an hour with a split finger. So, managers just have so many more options, and hitters are so much more trained for velocity and different things. So changing looks, and hitters have never been more prepared in advance than they are nowadays, whether it be physically, watching video, pitching machines that simulate 100 miles an hour. So I think it's a manager is more likely to use different. Dusty Baker's an old school manager, but he's not letting his starter go more than 5 innings. That tells me that Dusty Baker knows that he can't let the Braves or the Dodgers or whoever he's facing see a pitcher too many times in a row, or those hitters have an advantage usually.
Yeah, I go to the, to take what you're saying to a different level, I go look at what happened with the Dodgers, and it seemed like they worked backward in terms of how games normally work out, where you start with good relievers and you work your way up to the starter you want. What was that all about? And as manager of two teams that we all keep a close eye on, with the Cobbers and the Red Hawks, is that something that you feel was the right way to handle that pitching squad?
So much of it depends on what type of personnel. I'll give you an example of 2 different years. 2020 with the Red Hawks, we had a different type of pitching staff the first half. So we used an opener on occasion. Not a lot, but we did it on occasion. It worked really, really well for us. I think every time we use an opener, we end up winning the game, and not always because we use an opener, but it shortened up the game. Get one pitcher out there who you're trying to control his innings and pitches. He's got 1 or 2 innings, and then you throw maybe a traditional starter who can go 6 or 7 and get you to a closer. And that was because that particular year we had some starters who were really, really good, and we had a closer, but we had a hard time filling in that 7th, 8th inning. And so rather than put a 7th, 8th inning pitcher who was less effective, now you have an amazing starter out there to eat up to get you through that 7th, maybe the 8th to get your closer. We didn't really do it this year because we didn't really need to. We had, at the end of the year with Red Hawks, we had such an amazing relief corps that it just wouldn't have made sense. So much of it depends on, the math and how do you eat up 9 innings? How do you get, if your starter is only going 5 innings, does it make more sense to get your pitchers in there early in the game when they can have an impact, like the Dodgers with Gratterall, the guy's throwing 102 miles an hour, rather than wait for the 7th or 8th inning to where maybe the game is important. They put him in the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd inning when they know the game is important. So in some ways, not everyone agrees with that, but if you have one of your best relievers, you're going to put him into the part of the game where he absolutely will be guaranteed to have an impact, as opposed to maybe the 7th, 8th inning where the game's out of hand and it maybe it's too late. So there's different ways to think about it.
So, when you look at it and you look back on some of the teams you played on. You mentioned the Red Hawks back in some of the big runs that the Hawks made, but as the manager now, players that can make the biggest impact in the beginning, how do you shake that out in terms of bats as well? Because it seems to me that, National League, completely different style. I see that. And I see, first off, the National League is the way it should be. I'm not a big designated hitter fan. I'm kind of sad to see it going by the wayside. But, in terms of having the players up there that can make the biggest impact, how do you see how you shake up a lineup? I mean, traditionally, Chris, it used to be speed, definitely making contact, power. Should that be reversed a little bit?
Once again, it so much depends on what type of personnel you have. Back in the day, think about the old school St. Louis Cardinals, Kansas City Royals. It was Vince Coleman leading off, a bunt type guy, maybe a Willie McGee batting second. There's so many different ways to look at it. Where nowadays, you have so much more of a mix of speed and power with one player. You take an Alex Bregman, you take a Dustin Pedroia from the past, all those like that. The number two hitter in today's lineups are so drastically different than they were 20 years ago. And I'm a believer in that, because nowadays your second baseman isn't your guy hitting 240 and you bat him second to put a bunt down. Now your second baseman's hitting 35 homers, and he may only hit 270, 280, but he's hitting a lot of doubles and things like that. So since bunting is a less a part of the game, however, in the playoffs, I've always found it amazing how the style of play can be different based on situations. You might see a bunt. You're more likely to see a guy, hit a ground ball and beat the shift that he may not have done in the regular season. But when I started coaching at Concordia, we had some really strong offenses. I loved putting a really strong hitter in the number two spot, and sometimes even in the leadoff spot. And I'll go back to what A.J. Hinch said about Correa when he led him off back with the Astros. The reason why he chose to lead off Carlos Correa was, in his words, he wanted to send a guy up there who could punch the opponent in the face right away. Like, you send up and maybe he hits double, maybe he puts one over the fence. There's less of a threat of a stolen base maybe, but if the pitcher has to look up and sees a potential Hall of Famer in the first at-bat, man, that puts a lot of stress on the pitcher right away. And so I kind of like that, but having said that, I'll circle back to the first thing I said. It so much depends on what type of personnel you have for it to make sense.
Chris, obviously, ladies and gentlemen, he knows the game. But in terms of the bunt, being used, you're old school baseball. You learned it inside out, as the audience can see right now. How come the bunt is used as little as what it is used?
A combination of things. Number one is analytics might tell you mathematically that you're potentially leaving runs on the board, but every situation is so unique. The other factor is I think that hitters just aren't as good as what they used to be. I'll go back to like the Vince Coleman, even like Brett Butler back in the day, where the opponent could play all cut inside the grass line and he was still going to drop one down for a hit. There's just less guys who are able to do it. And I know it's easy to say, why doesn't he bunt the ball through the shift? And part of it is, some of it's hard-headedness, but a lot of it is they're just not able to do it. They wouldn't be able to accomplish it. I remember, Ryan Howard's one of my favorite teammates ever, hit 58 homers one year. He tried a couple times to bunt it through the shift, and he just flat out could not get it done. So it didn't matter where the infield was played. The whole left side of the infield could have been vacated, and he wasn't going to bunt because it just wouldn't have worked for him. Having said that, I love it when a hitter does bunt through the shift, because almost like a triple, it gets the whole stadium on their feet. Even if for the people who hate it and say, you just hit a single, but when a guy does it, it actually makes the highlights, whether or not they score a run. So I still like the bunt in a lot of different situations, but I'll circle back again to say it so much depends on what type of personnel you have, who's on base. Sometimes it depends on who's the pitcher on the mound. I know there's sometimes when we're facing a pitcher who's an amazing fielder, I'm less likely to want to bunt, because we might be less successful. On the flip side, sometimes the pitchers, that they're going to throw this ball in the 10th row if they field it, so let's get him involved. So once again, every situation is different. I would love to see the bunt involved just a little bit more often, but I understand why a lot of managers choose to not do it as well.
Do teams overmanage? Do they shift too much now?
Probably a little bit, but here's a situation like if someone came to you and said, hey, Carlos Correa hits the ball here 5% of the time, here 25% of the time, and here's 75% of the time, you're going to stack the deck in your favor as best you can, and sometimes he's going to beat the shift. I happen to love it when hitters beat the shift. It's one of those situations because I look at it like a pitcher and a catcher. Put yourself in the mind of a pitcher. You throw a good pitch, you get a 20 hopper right to the second baseman, and the second baseman's not there. That right there is far more devastating than simply giving up a single. Some pitchers handle it, but a lot of them don't handle it very well because, like I said, they made a great pitch, ground ball to second base. It's hit about 50 miles an hour, and nobody's there, and that really can mess with the psyche of a pitcher. We've seen it countless times. So as a manager, we only, like with the Red Hawks, we will shift a little bit with the second baseman sometimes towards the middle of the field, or with a lefty, maybe the shortstop. And I get nervous about it every single time because even though it might work the majority of the time the way it's supposed to, that one time when it doesn't, I really worry about, do we have a pitcher on the mound who can overcome that? Things like that. And I think in the baseball playoffs, I don't ever recall seeing so many times where that's happened, where a team shifted and a guy gets a hit the other way. I happen to, as a spectator and as a fan sitting on my lazy boy, I do love it when I see that.
Yeah, and you did see it a lot during the playoffs. You did, and it was like maybe that's because the best athletes are playing, and they know how to deal with it. Chris, I want to talk about that '08 Phillies team. I mean, you went from catcher of the FM Red Hawks all the way up to a world championship team. What's it like the first game? The very first game when you walk out on that field and you're sitting there knowing you're playing in the World Series?
Obviously, it's really hard to put that into words or perspective and tell you there because there's a lot of numbness, a lot of it's almost like a dream world in some ways. But for me, my entire Major League career was that way. So in some regards, playing in the World Series was maybe even more normal for me than other guys because my first day in the major leagues felt like Game 7 of the World Series, game number 30, game number 100, and so on and so forth. So when I was in the World Series, believe me, I knew I was in the World Series, and I knew it was the only game in town, and the world is watching. And when they introduce you with the starting lineups and, Joe Buck is saying your name as you're running out of the dugout, you say, okay, don't fall, don't trip, you'll be a blooper forever, things like that. But it's pretty surreal. And I would say, like I said, to play, and I started game 1 of the World Series, so that was even a little bit more profound, obviously. But it was to try to really put it into words. I could never do it justice to say it is like living in a dream. And when I look back at it, it still feels like it was somebody else. I'm holding this phone right now, and on this finger is my ring. I got on right now. I'll have to do a little transfer to show you in a second, but. So every now and then I got to pull my ring out of my bag and the little bag that it's in and remind myself that was actually me, not because I'm a world's biggest baseball fan. So for me to be part of not only a major league team, which is crazy enough of in itself to be in a team that made it to the World Series and take it another step further to win a World Series, it's still, it's hard to believe.
Well, I remember you started that game, because a lot of us wanted to see how it was going to shake out. We were watching one player in particular, and yet you were on a team that was pretty salty. You were on a team where when you looked around as a baseball fan and now a member of that team, was that intimidating at all? Was it to be in a locker room with players of that level, or was it because you played so well in the World Series and you really do? Was it like, I can play with these guys at this level?
Well, part of it, the reason why I think I fit in the major leagues with that particular team was because I was older than a lot of guys when I first broke into the major leagues. Even though I hadn't played in the big leagues yet, I had played more baseball, in the minor leagues, and I had played 3 months of winter baseball almost every year between Mexico and Venezuela at a really high level. So when you walk into the clubhouse of the Phillies, here's the biggest thing I'll say about the Phillies. When you walked into that clubhouse, nobody cared where you were from, how much money you made, how much time you had in the big leagues, whether you had 1 day or 10 years. If you walked through those doors, you showed up on time, you played your tail off, and you could help your team win, and you were all in. You were every bit as important as Chase Utley, Jimmy Rollins, and it came from those guys. It came from Charlie Manuel. And so, anybody who joined our team, like we'd make a trade or someone get called up to the minor leagues, within 1 week, you felt like you had been there for 10 years. That's the environment we have. That's the environment I try to create with the Red Hawks. It's certainly an environment we try to create with Concordia because it helped us win, but it helped everybody perform at their best, I felt.
Okay, so last one before I ask you two more. Chris, I have to ask you what it was like to get that last out. Because, when you just got the last out and you're sitting there about to be in a great big pile of men, what does that feel like?
It was stressful because it was Eric Hinsky at the plate. He had hit a homer early in this World Series. And so they had to go ahead run on base. And so a homer, they go ahead. So it actually meant something more than just the final. It meant actually like we could potentially lose this game. So when it happened, it was, don't get on the top step too early. Don't jinx it, things like that. But when that final pitch was made, swing and a miss by Brad Lidge, struck out Eric Hinsky, same thing, disbelief, amazement, run in that field, shed tears, pop champagne. Knew a World Series ring was on the horizon, but just the World Series parade, it was once again, the disbelief of being a major leaguer for me was amazing. The disbelief of being a World Series champion, still can't quite put my head around it.
I want to just tell people it's worth your time, it's worth your money to get his book, The 33-Year-Old Rookie, My 13-Year Journey from the minor leagues to the World Series. Find it. I've got it. I can tell you it's worth it. Show him the ring. I'm not going to let you by here 1 minute without finding a way to show him that ring, Chris. Just hang with me a second here, and I'll make sure that we've got everything right where we need it. And I think people are going to want. There she be.
Can you
there,
see
ladies
that,
and
right?
gentlemen, is that ring. So congratulations, bud. We'll get you on again as this series goes on, okay?
You got it. Thanks for having me, as always, Joel. A pleasure.